Matter a moment. Section 2B requires that state and local police officers attempt to determine the immigration status of any individual stopped or detained if the officer reasonably suspects the person is in the United States illegally. Folks in Arizona oftentimes would argue that that was the heart of the matter. A Pennsylvania Republican, Tim Murphy, co-chair of the House Doctors Caucus, back with us. And, sir, good morning to you again. Thank you for going on standby. Your reaction as you hear it now.
Well, I think that this points to the concerns we've had that with regard to Congress needs to act, the House and Senate, on some comprehensive immigration reform. Arizona passed this law because they were saying the federal government wasn't enforcing the law and they needed a number of clarifications. What this tells us is even the Supreme Court says it still needs to be clarified, and that's why they're sending this back to the Ninth Circuit with regard to whether or not a police officer can, with reasonable cause, ask about the immigration status. Apparently that part is going to remain, but that they still want the courts to rule on this, and I'm sure that more suits and more challenges will be out there. With the issue with regard to employment of immigrants, apparently that has been struck, and so illegal immigrants can hold jobs. This still goes back to a frustrating part of the American people, and that is for years we've been talking about let's have some comprehensive immigration reform. How are we going to deal with the millions of people here illegally? We're going to have to deal with this, and that means the Senate is going to have to move some of the bills we send over so the House and Senate can work together to resolve this. And this and the health care bill point out to the importance that you cannot have a Congress, House and Senate, not moving things forward, not sitting down together. We need to be working with the President of the United States, and so it points again to the importance of this fall's election because of the very different approaches with regard to how we're going to handle these key issues.
Congressman Murphy, I want to bring folks back for 1 second. Governor Jan Brewer said that they needed SB 1070 because the federal government was not enforcing the immigration law and a number of these provisions. Look, they threw all of it in here, hoping some of it would stick. And maybe the court was stuck on the fact that that requirement that they said the lower court was wrong in enjoying said that officers must check, not that they could if they wanted to. And there was a concern about racial profiling in that respect. What are your thoughts on that for other states who are looking at the capability of controlling the illegal immigrant population? I assume the other provision that was tossed out about the illegal immigrants working, they'll now rely on employers to monitor that.
Yes, they'll rely on employers, but the must-check thing, I think, also allowed the system whereby you would bypass the point about profiling, and that is you were required to check, therefore you weren't checking some sort of a profile. And it does speak to the governor's frustration with the federal government and with Eric Holder, the Attorney General, saying that he was going to sue Arizona and they weren't going to enforce the immigration law. These border states are very frustrated with the lack of approach of the Attorney General's office in enforcing the laws.
Last question on this. If officers begin now to check the status of those they stop because they have a reasonable belief that they're deportable, how do they decide whether or not they're going to choose to ask someone for paperwork? Because it sounds like the court has said, look, this is going to stand for now until someone else challenges it, and we're not saying they won't.
I suspect what's going to happen is a number of attorneys are going to be looking for cases where someone is in a traffic stop or some other stop by a police officer, and the police officer does ask for papers, immigration papers, and this will come back before the courts fairly quickly.
What are the damages?
But still,
what would be the damages of asking someone whether or not you have a right to be here if they're stopped for even a misdemeanor?
It is appropriate by the Arizona law, and it sounds like the Supreme Court saying they're not convinced it's not appropriate yet. They're looking for further clarification because the Supreme Court, from my understanding of what was just read, the Supreme Court saying it does not appear on face value that there's something that's unconstitutional about this. So there is some protection for police officers here. But it still doesn't address the broader question which Congress needs to address, and that is, so this should not be put on the shoulders of an individual police officer in an individual traffic stop. It does speak to the problems with the Attorney General's office with enforcing this and working with Congress and working with the states to make sure they deal with this problem, which is a huge problem for states.
All right, Congressman Tim Murphy, thank you so much for weighing in on this. The health care decision didn't come in this report from Shannon Bream, but a lot to digest on immigration.